Hello, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark und freilich, begashmis u'beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. First, I'll make a bracha. My throat doesn't feel so well. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakal li b'dvarim. We're going to start with the pasuk first, and then we'll get to the thought of the week. Today is Chof Ches Menachemov, Erev Shabbos Kodesh Pashas Re'eh Shabbos Mevorchim Chodesh Elul. We'll start with the pasuk that we spoke already many times about. Gal einai v'abit neflois mitorasecha. Unveil my eyes that I may behold wonders from your Torah. We spoke many times, it was brought down in the Rebbe's Maimorim, that the emphasis is Gal einai v'abit neflois mitorasecha. We're not asking the Eibishter to reveal himself, like it says in the first part of the pasuk, v'nigla kveda vaya v'ro kol basa. The first the Eibishter is revealed and then we see. And over there also the emphasis is that it's not enough v'nigla kveda vaya, that Hashem reveals himself, something that comes from above. The ultimate purpose is v'ro kol basa. It has to become natural as part of our flesh. Just like now, the natural world order is that we see the physical, we're asking that it should be the opposite way around. And this is going to be ultimately when Mashiach comes, as we'll discuss today further. And this is the connection. This week's parsha is Re'eh. So in Chassidus, it discusses at length, Re'eh, that there's a way that we serve the Eibishter in a way of seeing, and there's a way we serve the Eibishter in the way of hearing, and the advantages of seeing over hearing. We're still in the middle of the shloishim of Rabbi Yoel Kahn, and I want to speak about a certain aspect that I don't think is stressed enough. And again, as usual, there are things I'm going to talk about today that, like I mentioned last week, that I address to my students primarily. Those that disagree, everyone has permission to disagree. But for my students, I believe this is an important message that I would like to impart. And especially now that you hear people speak about Rabbi Yoel, and I've heard some people say, this is what Rabbi Yoel said, but I speak more like this, or something like that. The whole point of remembering someone, a mashpia of Chassidus or a Chassidish Yid, is that we should learn from him. Not say we've evolved or graduated. On the contrary, we have to learn from that person and go in his ways, etc. So, today, the shir, the thought, I'm calling Elokus בפשיטות. And I will explain as we go on. But first we'll start with the name of the parsha, Re'eh, which means to see, behold. The pasuk says, Re'eh anochi nois lefneichem hayoyim es habracha v'es haklola. And Chassidus explains there's a contrast between Riyah, seeing, and Shmi'a, and hearing. And Moshe Rabbeinu's purpose was all the more to impress, to help us reach all the level of Re'iyah be'Elokus. We should see godliness. Now what's the advantages of seeing over hearing? Can't compare when you hear something or when you see it. What's the difference? So we say that when you hear something, so if someone else will come along later and say, ask you questions on what you heard, those questions will knock out what you heard. But when it's something that you saw, even if someone will come along with questions that seem to contradict what you saw, but then you're going to say, but ich hab allein gesehen. Rabbi will talk about this and he say, ich hab allein gesehen. I saw myself. Ich hab allein gesehen means what you saw touched a deeper place in your soul than what you heard. What you heard reaches your level of intellect. As long as it makes sense, you accept it. But what you saw reaches deeper, touches deeper, a deeper place in your nefesh, in your soul, that bypasses, transcends the intellect, even if you don't understand it. But ich hab allein gesehen. And that's why when we speak about something that we saw, we say it's the most powerful conviction. The amtus of what's achieved through the ear, the conviction which is accomplished through sight, through seeing, is more powerful than anything else, generally speaking. There's a maimer of the Rebbe Vart, one of the most famous maimerim, where over there he goes even deeper. than seeing. But generally speaking, we speak about the advantage and the superiority of seeing. That seeing is something that reaches the deepest place in the soul. As Rabbi Groner of Australia, whenever he would speak, many times you say, I see it now. I see it now. In other words, what he saw reached so deep in him that it could be 40 years later, 50 years later, 60 years later, it's still alive. Because I see it now. And when you see it now, the conviction, the strength of the conviction, as if it's happening now, you're reliving it. I see it now. Because it reached the very essence. And therefore it doesn't change. Actually, by the way, in addition to the beginning of the Parsha, which starts at A, we also have in the end of the Parsha, where it says, and this could be a connection, where it says, Sholish Pamim Bashana, 3 times a year, Yira Kol Zchurcha, Es Penei Hashem Alikecha, Bamokim Asher Yivchar, B'chag HaMatzos, B'chag HaShavuos, B'chag HaSukkos, V'lo Yira Es Penei Hashem Alikecha. The Pasuk says, 3 times a year, all your males should appear before Hashem, your God, in the place that He will choose. So, interestingly enough, the Balaturim, on the words that we have to see Pnei, the face of Hashem, we have to appear before Hashem, Yira Kol Zchurcha Pnei Hashem Alikecha. The Balaturim says, on the words Pnei, Ponim B'Ponim, face to face. So, al pi Chassidus, it's very telling that when we say face to face, Ponim means permeates. So it's the deepest level. The connection, when we see Hashem, means that we come face to face, essence to essence. The most intimate connection is through seeing. And in Chassidus, when it speaks about the idea, the Maila, the advantage of going to the Beis HaMikdash, it mentions the Maimon Azal, and the Rebbe explained it in the last week, L'Kutei Sichos Chelik Tes, Ekev, the advantage of the Zman HaBayis. We say that now that we're in Golus, Ein Onu Yecholim Lirois U'Lishtachvos Lefanecha. We can't see Hashem, and therefore we don't prostrate ourselves before Hashem. In other words, it's dependent one on the other. When we reach a level of Lirois, when we see Hashem, in other words, the conviction of godliness is so powerful that it touches our very core, then that automatically brings ule ishtachvos. We prostrate ourselves completely. As Chassidus explains, that ishtachava is more than bowing down. Hachra, kriya, is just like an external level of subservience and bittul to Hashem, but not total and absolute. But when we say hishtachava, pishut yadayim v'raglayim, I think we spoke about this already many times, when you're completely flat out, that your intellect and your feet are on the same level, that means we're dealing with something which is completely, incomparably greater than you, a whole different realm, and you connect it with that whole different realm, true infinity, God as God is, then it brings out a bittul, which is totally, the total experience, top to toe, and you become permeated with godliness completely, saturated and immersed and enveloped by Hashem. So really we see that the advantage of Re'eh is on 2 levels. Number one, an eichus thing, that when you see something, it touches the very core of your being. It reaches a deeper place. That's more a qualitative thing. And then, if you reach a level of Riyah, it also becomes a quantitative thing. In other words, that it permeates the person completely, from his head to his toes. So that's the advantage of Riyah. Now, what does it mean practically? And here we come to the Yoel, and here we come to a way of life, and here we come to what I believe is the real Chassidische aspiration, and why I believe it's so relevant. I don't want to elaborate on this because some people might see it as negative, and today we're not going to speak anything negative. But, if a person wants to be connected to the Rebbe and to Chassidus, then you have to know what Chassidus says. You have to see the world through the lens of Chassidus, to the Rebbe. And if you want to teach and influence Chassidus, please give the true, unadulterated, undiluted, real thing. It could be you're going to give a drop. Like the analogy of the Ben Melech, the prince who needs the crushing of the jewels. And that's the antidote. That's going to save the person, the child. True. But that drop has to be 100%. Give people the real thing. Authentic Chassidus. And this is what Rabbi Yoel is all about. And this is what we see time and time about Rabbi Yoel. Elokus b'pshitos. What does it mean, Elokus b'pshitos and Olam b'schachos? There's two expressions that are very similar that are brought down in Chassidus. Elokus b'pshitos, Olam b'schachos. Sometimes it says Elokus b'pshitos, Metzius b'schachos, or the other way around, Olam or Metzius b'pshitos and Elokus b'schachos. What that means is there's two ways to live life. One way is that you look at the physical and you see the physical material as your natural mindset. In the worst case scenario, it would be somebody who doesn't really believe in spirituality, Elokus, and he says, what I touch and what I smell and what I hear and what I could access with my physical senses, or that which could be proven in a laboratory, in a scientific laboratory with scientific instruments, that I believe in. Something which cannot be proven with scientific instruments and measured and quantified, I don't believe in. So that's a worst case scenario. But if we speak about it b'dakos, more in a refined way, it means that, like the example we gave many times before, a person has a geneva in his house. He has a robbery in his house. Question is, what's his immediate reaction? Elokus b'pshitos, which means there was a robbery, I have to check my mezuzah. Because mezuzos are protection of the house. So the first thing is, I have to check my mezuzos to see if my mezuzos are kosher. And if there was something wrong with the mezuzah, I get the best mezuzahs. The Eibishter wants you should do things in a natural way. Okay, I also have to have a lock on the door. I shouldn't leave my door unlocked. That is referring to the little shimurim of Pesach. But usually the Eibishter says, lock your door. Because we have to do things in a natural way too. And we'll explain that another time. But the point is, your perspective is a Elokus b'pshitos. It's more about the mezuzahs. Therefore, a mezuzah, I'll pay for each mezuzah $250. A lock, I'll get a security system. Yaitzu tzayin. Or you have the other way around. Somebody has metzias b'pshitos, olam b'pshitos. He right away says, how did the Kahn get into my house? He broke through this alarm. I'm going to have to get state-of-the-alarm, most advanced security system. He'll spend $10,000 to upgrade his apartment or his house to have the best security. When it comes to mezuzah, he says, just give me a kosher mezuzah. That means by this person, olam is b'pshitos, what's his natural, innate way of thinking, whatever he sees and feels and understands, and Elokus b'schachos, he sees Elokus, godliness, as a second thought. He doesn't want to get God angry, so therefore he'll do it that way. So we have to realize this is a constant training, conditioning that a person has to have and work on himself to see the world as the Eibishter wants you. The real way is to see the godliness as the real thing, as paramount, and the physical comes b'schachos. Now people forget, or either they want to forget or I don't know what. By the Rebbe, it was obviously Elokus b'pshitos all the time. And let's go back. If someone would ask me in a certain sense, what do I believe the Rebbe wanted to accomplish? So obviously the answer is Mashiach. But in a way, you could also say it in one word also, besides for Mashiach, that Elokus should be b'pshitos. Like the story of the Barditcherver, he put it in different words. The Barditcherver would turn to Hashem and say, why do you blame the Jews? And he said, if you put all the taivos elam hazeh in a book, if you put all the pleasures and lusts of this world in a book, and you put the fires of Gehenna, that's the way he put it, in front of their eyes, then obviously everyone will do the right thing. But we could paraphrase that and put it differently and say, if you put all the pleasures of this world, the lusts and the vices in a book, and you saw divinity, then obviously divine revelation every day, obviously everyone will be doing the right thing. And that's what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. That's what it means, Mashiach. What's going to happen when Mashiach comes? As we mentioned before, the pasuk V'ro kol basar. Just like now, the natural world order is that we could see the physical, because we are physical. When Mashiach comes, we say the flesh, it's going to become the natural ability and function of the flesh to be able to see godliness. And that's what the pasuk means. I think we mentioned this before. The pasuk, it says, ayin ba'ayin yirahu. We'll see eye to eye. And Chassidus explains that right now there's something called das Elyon and das Tachten. Das Elyon is the way the Eibishter looks at things. Das Tachten is the way we perceive things. And we say when Mashiach will come, will be the ultimate, finally, ayin ba'ayin. We could say face to face. We'll finally see eye to eye, be totally one, in sync with the Eibishter. We're going to see ayin ba'ayin. We're all going to see it in the way of das Elyon, obviously, Elokus בפשיטות, and עולמות בהתחדשות. So let's give some examples from the Rebbe. If someone would write to the Rebbe and say they're having marital problems, the Rebbe would answer, as far as I know, 99.9% of the times, since there was a kiruv shaloi b'mkoima, therefore now there's a richuk. Since they didn't keep the laws of family purity properly, they had a kiruv shaloi b'mkoima, they didn't keep to the laws of harchakas properly when they meant to keep a certain distance, a separation. Therefore, now they're having problems. I want to know one marriage counselor in the world that would say that this is the reason why there's discord in the relationship between the husband and wife. They would laugh at you. It's just the opposite. It's counterintuitive. How can you say because there was a kiruv shaloi b'mkoima? I'm just giving an example. And so on and so forth. Every single time someone's sick and the Rebbe says, check your tefillin, and you look in the tefillin, he had a heart attack and something was wrong with b'chol levavcha. Is that called Olam בפשיטות Elokus בהתחדשות, or the other way around? Totally. Put on tefillin, look at your tefillin, check your tefillin, and then you'll fix your heart ailment. And so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. This is what the Rebbe was drilling into us constantly. Elokus בפשיטות and עולמות בהתחדשות. And I personally feel today we don't get that message from some of the people that are the speakers and the leaders. I'm talking to myself as a spiritual leader who's a teacher. Let's not stray off course. If you're teaching Chassidus, teach Chassidus. One of my students once said a line about another lecturer who gives talks all the time. And he's a rabbi. He says, Rabbi Winner, I could listen to all of his speeches in the Beis HaKisei. And that's what this boy told me. So I thought, you have a point. In other words, he was trying to say, this rabbi speaks words of wisdom, but it's words of wisdom you can get in any pop psychology book. He doesn't hear psukim from this person. He doesn't hear the way he's quoting Chassidus, a Vort, a pasuk. Give them Elokus, the way the Rebbe wants. We have to remember what the Alter Rebbe's message is. And this we saw by Rabbi Yoel in an unbelievable way. I don't want to repeat things that were said by many others, so I'll just say some of the things that I heard from Rabbi Yoel, where this is brought out in a very powerful way. First of all, in Ches, in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about how when a person learns Chochmas Chitzonis, when you learn secular wisdoms, you contaminate your Chabad Shebenefesh. So Rabbi Yoel used to say, I'll give you a pashto example. He says, you see the reaction of someone who went to university, from Yid, and someone who didn't go to university. How? Because that person who went to university was metame his Chabad Shebenefesh, he compromised his Chabad. And he says the simple proof is, you see that when someone comes along and says, Torah says like this, and science says like this, one person says, when he hears that, it's a kash on science. How could science say this if Torah says like that? And Rabbi Yoel was saying that's the reaction of somebody who hasn't contaminated his Chabad. But then you can have the reaction of another person. He's an Orthodox Jew, he's a fine Jew, and he hears that Torah says this and science says this. So he says, Sakash on Torah. How could Torah say this if science says this? That's a classic, beautiful example of what it means Elokus b'pshitos, Elokus b'schachos, or Elokus b'pshitos and Elokus b'schachos. By the person who says now it's a question on science, that means the whole science is b'schachos. Elokus is b'pshitos. By the person who has a kash on Torah now, that means by him, it's science b'pshitos. That was one example. Another story that Rabbi Yoel used to always chazer often, and this comes before I want to say how Rabbi Yoel always spoke about how every maimah, every sikha that you learn, you have to ask yourself, what is the Rebbe telling me here? What's the message? How am I supposed to work on my hashkafa? How is my hashkafa changing because of this maimah, because of this sikha? Whoever's a student of Rabbi Yoel used to hear this all the time. And this is what we're talking about today. So one of the stories that he said many times, I think it's even brought down in the Sefer, is that after the Rebbe spoke the first time against learning Chachmas Chitzonius, I think it was in the Sikha of Simchas Torah, Tafshin Tetzvav, don't quote me on that. So Rabbi Yoel was present by a discussion with two parents, and these two parents were discussing whether they're going to continue or they're going to send their child to English. So one of them says, no way, I'm not going to send them to English. Look at the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, no English, so there's no English, that's it. So the other younger man tells the other younger man, they had two younger lights are having a discussion, and the other one tells the one who said, from now on, no more English. He says, oh, you're becoming so holy? Yeah, your life is perfect now. You don't read any magazines or newspapers and all those type of stuff. So the Yoel was saying that the second younger man who told that to the first younger man. Oh, 1 second. I forgot if the first younger man answered. I'm not sure if the first younger man answered what I'm going to say now, or Rabbi Yoel explained how the first younger man is right. And the punchline of the story is that the first younger man is correct. Why? Because even if he looks at himself and he says, I'm not doing the right thing, like I'm already jeopardized or compromised, but for my kid I want the best. So if the Rebbe says no English because it's not good for my child, so my child, I want what's better for him. I'm not holding by that level completely, so what? But that means that in hashkafa, I have the right hashkafa. That's what Yoel was trying to bring out. But the other younger man who tells the first younger man, oh, you're so holy, that means he doesn't realize the damage of what does it mean, how whatever is not the hashkafa of Torah could affect. So in other words, his hashkafa is not 100%. Mashenkin, the first parent that understands that his child shouldn't learn Chachmas Chitzonius, at least his hashkafa is correct, and therefore he'll do the right thing by his child, because for his child he wants the best. So we have to realize always, you have to ask yourself a question when you have an hashkafa. Who has the hashkafa? Where's the hashkafa coming from? There's Menschlichkeit, there's Yiddishkeit, there's Chassidishkeit, there's Chabad Chassidus. So you have to understand, what's out there and what is coming from the right source. Actually, there's another very interesting pasuk in this week's parsha, which I haven't seen too many commentaries on it, but it's a very interesting pasuk. And it says, there's similar other pasukim in the Torah, and that's the pasuk of Kapitel Yud Beis, pasuk Lamed, where he says, Hishomer l'cho pentinokesh achareim. Achrei hishomdam mipanecha. Ufen tidresh lelikeyem leimer echa yavdu agoyim eiles elikeyem v'esa kein gamoni. Esaliheyem. Point is, I don't want to get into the whole pasuk now, but just the beginning, he says the Moshe Rabbeinu is warning us. Hishomer l'cho pentinokesh. Beware lest you be attracted after them. In other words, the secular way might be very attractive. And every couple of months, weeks, I don't know what, there's new isms, there's new fads, there's new fashions. And they seem very attractive and everyone's falling for it. and then it becomes a cultural thing, and it becomes a discussion, a topic of discussion, etc., etc. So here comes the pasuk, Hishamru, lecha, pentinakish achareim. We have to be told Hishamru lecha. Don't fall for any of the latest fads. Don't fall for any of the latest isms. They're all dead. And that's what it says in the pasuk, by the way. The Eibishter shows you sooner or later how they die and there's no real ultimate truth in it. And that's what we're saying over here. If we're talking about Chassidus and Torah Chassidus, of the Baal Shem Tov, of the Alter Rebbe, of the Frierdiker Rebbe, of the Rebbe is giving us Elokus b'pshitos. That's it. Look at the sichas. You could demonstrate in every single sicha how it's Elokus b'pshitos. And every single answer of the Rebbe, you could see how it's Elokus b'pshitos. It's amazing, and also I don't want to elaborate on this, but in chapter 29 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says something, and not too many people make such a big rash about it, and that is, he says, "V'hinei al yidei zeh Yoel nafsho lekis lahoyrene be'emes yichud derinso b'riachushis v'lo yibchine shmiya v'avona levada." And then he says something unbelievable, phenomenal. Kamishikosav mokamacher shezeu sheish kol avodah. The Alter Rebbe says over here in chapter 29 that the purpose of all of the avodah is to come to a level of serving the Eibishter with Riyah, seeing it. So obviously over here the Alter Rebbe doesn't mean that we're coming to Mashiach, that we're going to see divinity in a revealed way, like Matan Torah or Kriyas Yamsuf, when somebody was able to say Zeh Kelim Avehu. We're talking to a Beinani. And we're talking chapter 29, which really, you could say, is one of the most down-to-earth, getting into the nitty-gritty of the person and his flaws. In other words, the Beinani with all his limitations. And nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe over here speaks about the idea that the purpose of everything is to come to Riyah. And over there he obviously means what we're discussing now, that you work on yourself, that it's like the most powerful conviction, as if you're seeing something physical. Just like you feel yourself alive, just like you know that you have consciousness. That's what it means, that you see it. And that's what it means, Elokus b'pshitos. Godliness becomes your natural first thought and the way you think. So, I just want to finish with a lashon of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And we have to remember this. The Frierdiker Rebbe says in the Sikha, Heint is the Avodah from a galas ein de memes. Today our Avodah is to reveal the truth. The truth means speaking about striving for excellence. The truth is speaking about striving, developing, higher, aspire to higher, not feel good and wishy-washy and diluting. So, Heint is the Avodah from Megalas and them emes. Give people the truth. Nit nispol werden fakenim. Don't get affected by anyone. Nit nispol werden. Not only not to get affected, nor is on ganz in the tefes mokem zayin. Don't even reckon with it. Nit rechnen sich mit keinem. Don't reckon with anybody. Gain in their eigene Weg. Go in your own way. Over here he means your own way. Torah, mitzvahs, Rabbi Seinu Luciano, Avram and Yitzchak and Yankiv and all the Rabbeim. And then he says, Echad hoy Avram. There was one Avram. He spoke the truth and he went against the whole world. And then he continues over here. Zol sein einer, finif, zen. Aber der Rem is also chanhen. The Frierdiker says there could be more than only one. 1, 5, 10, but at least we're going to convey the truth. Let us predict the truth of hu levadi hu veins olosei, the truth of emes havaya le'elom, the truth of Chassidus. What we learned from Rabbi Yoel was always, the way he spoke was Elokus b'pshitos. This is what the Rebbe wants. This is going to be the Gili of Mashiach. Begula mitzvah shlema, take it from miyad mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.